On January 7th, 2025, at around 7 p.m., I got a text from a family member saying they were evacuating their home immediately. This was how I first heard about the Eaton Fire, which had sparked in the foothills of Altadena, California, just an hour before I got that text. Amid hurricane-force winds without a drop of moisture, what started as just a spark was already threatening whole neighborhoods within minutes. As the night stretched on, block after city block got evacuation warnings and then orders. Live television showed disabled seniors being literally carried from nursing facilities onto city buses at the last second, fiery embers swirling around them. People live-streamed from their phones as the flames approached, too fast for them to grab their belongings and pack a car. People died that night, as the fire came faster than they could escape, faster than they'd ever seen in their lifetimes. If you're not from the area, you probably still heard about the Eaton Fire, the Palisades Fire, and others that tore through LA this January. To me, the outside story focused on spectacle. We heard about celebrities evacuating and about the multi-million-dollar mansions, iconic LA views, and the priceless works of art being threatened. But, to me, a focus on wealth and celebrity misses the fact that LA is incredibly diverse, and the community roots go much, much deeper. Altadena has historically been something of a sanctuary for Black families in Los Angeles. It's a place where they could buy homes, find community, and build intergenerational wealth amidst the backdrop of segregation and redlining. And now, more than half of that city is gone. I have 3 guests today, all of whom grew up in Altadena. The stories they share cover the shock and the pain of the fires this year, but also how this ties into a wider history of race and the built environment in the United States. Environmental racism is a critical factor in how the U.S. is experiencing the climate crisis. While on average our country may be less vulnerable than other parts of the world, we're incredibly segregated, putting communities of color more at risk. When we decide whether or not to act on climate, the consequences of those decisions are not being shared equally. When I asked my guests today what utopia looks like, they all described Altadena in some way. Sometimes, utopia doesn't look like shiny, futuristic cities built clean from the ground up. Sometimes it looks like recognizing and preserving the work of generations before us, who also wanted a brighter future of their own. Sometimes, utopia looks like drawing from the love, connection, and community power we already have, if we choose to open up to it. One final note before we get started: if you're able, please give to the rebuilding effort at denarebuild.com. The fires may be out, but there are many, many years of work ahead for the Dena community, and your donation goes a long way towards keeping that community together. That's denarebuild.com, link in the description. On behalf of my guests today, and all of my friends in Altadena, thank you. You're listening to Solar Punk Now. Join us, and let's imagine a brighter future together.
My name is Dani Haogue. I'm a PhD student at UCLA. I'm studying environment and sustainability, mostly focused on environmental justice and environmental racism. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm also the research director for the Better Watts Initiative. And we study lead poisoning in Watts.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Wesley Cox. I am a professor in ethnic studies and African American studies. Um, my pronouns are he, him, and yeah, born and raised in Pasadena, Altadena area.
My name is Zaria Smith. I go to CSUN studying business marketing. I co-founded Dena Rebuild, which is a grassroots organization that helps those impacted by the Eaton Fire. And I also do community outreach at a law firm.
Great. So I'd love to hear about everyone's, I guess, sort of personal background with the fires, since you're all currently in Altadena or have been residents at some point. So what's, I guess, your personal or family story, and what has that experience looked like both during the disaster and then the sort of recovery and grieving process afterwards?
So for me, I haven't lived physically in Altadena since high school. I used to live with my grandmother on and off, and I essentially was living on Lake and Poppy Fields. So that property essentially is gone. What was left of it is a driveway essentially. But yeah, that memory or that childhood home does not exist anymore. My great uncle lost his home in the fires, and just many friends and loved ones and just people you grew up with, essentially like anyone you knew, went to high school with, middle school with, even elementary school, their homes, are gone. Places you may have had a play date, a pool party, there it doesn't exist. So that's mostly the impact I would say I've been experiencing, and also just kind of reimagining, I guess, like different family landscapes, for lack of better terms, when you go over to like a person's home for the holidays and it's just that feeling, or you've been there before. I think that's something that myself and other people are probably going to have to deal with and think about and transition with, is no longer having these family events, these birthday parties, these gatherings for the death of loved ones, or anniversaries in these spaces that are in Altadena. That has to kind of be shifted temporarily, and for some permanently, right, to different parts of either the country or California.
So I am a third generation Altadena, Pasadena resident. Most of my extended family members in Altadena lost their homes. My immediate family home is still standing on Altadena Drive, but the fire came really close. So it's just weird to still have your home but have everything else be gone. My whole life, we expected that a fire could happen. We have evacuation lists all over our house. And when we had to evacuate, our photos and everything were together and they were easy to pack up, but it's just weird to still have something familiar, but the rest of the community just be unrecognizable. I haven't lived in Altadena for some time now that I've been in grad school and college. But that's home. Like I've lived there most of my life and I know every single street in Altadena. That's where I played in the park, went swimming at the pool. It's where my ancestors are buried. So it's just been a lot.
I'm also like a third or fourth, I think I'm fourth generation Altadena. My grandparents came here, like my great grandparents came here from Montgomery, and then they sent for all of their siblings. So most of my family at some point lived in Altadena. Um, and they kept the houses for a long time. So they passed it down to one of my cousins, and then all of those homes that they passed down burned down in the fire. So that's been really difficult to see something that was like so important to my family just be gone in an instance. I haven't lived in Altadena since I was in middle school, but I was working there for the past 3 years. So I was still a part of the community. So it's just been a little difficult adjusting to it not being there and not being as involved anymore.
I really appreciate you all sharing your stories with me, and I'm sorry for your losses. So something I'm hearing from all of you is this very intergenerational experience, and I think we could start there. I'd love to talk about the history of Altadena as a unique place in Los Angeles, for Black families, and how that ties into sort of the 20th century patterns of Black families coming to California and migration in that time period?
Yeah, so my dad's side of the family, like my dad's paternal side of the family has been in the Pasadena area since the 1930s. And what have you. So it looks different in all like parts of the family essentially, but if we're looking at Altadena and just LA in general, I think we have to recognize that a lot of Black folks saw, this region and this place as a great state and city of opportunity, right? Like a place away from Jim Crow, not necessarily dealing with limited opportunities. And that's not to say that there wasn't racism here or other forms of Jim Crow that did take place, but they were able to navigate it in a different way. They could own a nice home in Altadena or Ladera Heights or Crenshaw or, West Adams and what have you. Like there was opportunity to do that, and also opportunity to go to school, to go to college, to basically kind of integrate these spaces that were like new to them. And so I think Altadena is also a part of that. So I don't know about other folks, but for my family, when they first moved here, they kind of lived in different areas. They lived in like Antelope Valley, Compton, Harbor City, South Central, and kind of like we're popping all over the place, and mostly we're renters at the time. But in like the late 60s, early 70s, my mother's family, they were able to buy a home in Altadena. And it was extremely rare that they were able to do that. And they were also on the side of lake that was considered a white neighborhood. They were like integrating the neighborhood essentially, and they're one of like five or four Black families on Poppy Fields Drive. So for them, it became a real economic opportunity. But that didn't, come isolated, right? But I think when you go from renting in a place like, the city of Los Angeles all over, and then you are able to have opportunity at home ownership in a place like Altadena, that means something. And you see a shift in like life and opportunity and meaning. And also like these homes are on huge lots, like really big lots, lots of nature, near trails, um, hiking, etc. And again, I think Danny will probably later talk more about, kind of the nuances of that and what that means, right? But I think at the time, and specifically in like the 70s, we have to pay attention to the real post civil rights, post voting rights, housing discrimination act, like these acts were being passed, and then there becomes more legal precedent for being able to, own land in a neighborhood that you weren't supposed to own land in. And I'm also thinking about, oh God, did it slip my mind? Oh, the nuances of having a Black middle class. So this is a rant, but it's important. In the 1970s, essentially, I think Black families had reached like some of their highest income earnings ever, for the time, in the United States of America. And so there was kind of this nuance in bubbling and, excitement about the new Black middle class and what that meant, on like a larger level, right? Homeownership, education, um, I would say employment opportunities as well in unionized jobs and factories and what have you, right? But that was a part of, this movement of like upward mobility, moving past civil rights, leaving Jim Crow behind, and looking toward a brighter future essentially for Black Americans. So I think Altadena definitely has a legacy with that.
So, I am curious what makes Altadena specifically that place. I've heard that the Pasadena Altadena area had a history of like racial covenants with housing in that time period. So is that a factor? Are there other factors you can point to?
Okay, I would also probably add in white flight as a factor. I know that before my grandparents moved in, the home was, I think it was built in the 1930s, and a white family had lived there previously. And so they were able to move into that home after, those folks had moved out. Um, I mean, I think again, I would point to the upward Black mobility. A lot of my family members who were living in Altadena, Pasadena area, they were born in the South. They had migrated over here. They were first generation college graduates. Um, They were teachers, they were educators, they worked for LA Unified School District, and they were able to take these jobs that they got and purchase homes. Um, I think Altadena specifically, though, Danny has more historical context, like the environmental aspect of it. But also, one thing that is important is to note that Altadena's never been an incorporated city. It's unincorporated. It doesn't have a city hall. It's not, it doesn't have its own school board and what have you. We kind of blend into this background of like Pasadena Unified and the city of Pasadena, and also kind of being, you know, in juxtaposition, I guess, to like we're not Pasadena, we're not the city of LA, we're LA County, but we're like our own thing. And so I don't know, I just feel like that really thrived in terms of like Altadena hosting a black population. I would also argue the churches there, right? Like we have had churches in Altadena for quite some time. My great grandmother, who was like born in like 1917 and ended up coming to Altadena, like she was a member of the church probably from anywhere in the 1930s and 40s until 2014, like when she passed away.
Wow.
Um, so I think if you're looking outside of like Los Angeles, like LA proper, and you're looking for a community and you're black, you knew Altadena would be a space for that, right? I think something else that we may underscore and not think about as much is people are communicating with their family members where they're living at, writing letters home, calling, hey, you should move out here. It's great out here. You know, you could buy this piece of land. There's opportunity, there's a job. And so people are, you know, word of mouth are speaking to relatives, and it's like, oh, why not move out there? My cousin's out there, you know, or I have a brother who lives out there, etc. So I think that's also part of it is like you having a family member in the region or the area, again, knowing that you could have the opportunity to own land and property, um, and just knowing there's kind of a long standing, even if it is unspoken to some people, right? There's a long-standing community in Altadena. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like sometimes when you talk to people as a black person and you tell other black people where you're from in LA, they're like, "You're from where?" And you're like, "I'm from Altadena." And then they're like, "Oh, that's different." You know, like it's not always seen as like the norm of like a neighborhood you're supposed to come from as a black person, but it's like it's old. Like that area, that culture, that community has been there for a century at minimum or at maximum, right? Like it's long standing. So I think community is also part of it.
Wesley, did you see my comment?
Oh, I mean, yeah, Danny's not wrong. Okay, so Danny said they didn't want black people, so we made our own empire. And I think Altadena could be seen as like a little empire of black folks. Like we did that. Um, if you look at a historical map, like if you look at the homeowners loan corporation maps that were created in the 1930s, right? This is where the term redlining comes from. Like we always say redlining, 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 right? And redlining is specifically referring to um, the HOLC. So if you ever see HOLC and someone says redlining, this private corporation was essentially creating these maps of cities and giving them to banks to let them know where they could loan and who they could loan to. So if you're looking at a redlining map and it's a Pasadena, Altadena area, you can quite literally see, right? If you're someone who's been there for multiple generations, you can see where your family has been placed, um, depending on when they bought the home, etc. So I'll give a quick example. Um, Near the Rose Bowl, there's some parts near the Rose Bowl that were like really, you know, lavish and wealthy looking. And then there's other parts of the Rose Bowl that were a little, you know, less lavish, maybe were only one story, didn't have two-story homes, etc. So I think in 2021, I was doing a project because I did a digital humanities certificate at UCLA, and we did a spatial overlay with like a redlining map and like actually Pasadena, Altadena. And I'm like, oh my God, my great grandmother's home is literally red lines. Like where she had this house, her and her husband, when they built the 210 freeway, they kicked them out and then, you know, said eminent domain and they said, go get another house. The other house was still in a red line area of town. Long story short, you know, despite the redlining, that property came to be, you know, worth some money, like a good amount of money because it's next to the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl is popular. UCLA has their games there. Um, you know, there was concerts there, there are concerts there. And so now the value has changed. But long story short, the historical context is that this, was specifically a neighborhood and a slice of the block that they were pushed to live on because they were black. So anyway, if anyone else wants to join in, please.
Yeah, mostly west of Lake.
Hmm.
And there has been a response from the community post fire saying that west of Lake was treated differently with the evacuation orders, and that's why a lot of people couldn't get out. And that is an area where most of the black people in Altadena live, which is west of Lake Street or Lake Avenue.
That's also where most of the 17 people that died were living
Mm.
too.
Yeah, and most of them are elderly and disabled.
Could you say more about what that difference was that people were experiencing?
So the evacuation warnings that went out at like 6:30 in the morning only went out to East Altadena, which is mostly where white and Asian people live that live in Altadena. And then the people who live west of Lake, they were being knocked, like people were going around knocking on the doors, but they never got an evacuation notice to get out. Um, so a lot of people, by the time they got evacuated, the fire was already on their street.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's pretty sad. And a lot of them were like elderly people and people of color. So it's kind of like outrageous that that nobody's being held accountable for it anyway. But
Yeah, I remembered that morning. I mean, watching it from a distance, but it did seem like that side of town had been underprepared, underinformed. It came so fast.
I would add to that, yeah, like my great uncle, who it's really unfortunate, and I don't know, I haven't thought about it too much, but I think there is a sadness about how quickly things went. Like he didn't have time to grab photos, of like our great grandmother or his sister, my grandmother, etc. Because he literally was like, the fire was like in the backyard already, and he's saying he essentially pulled out him and his wife, they drove off, and then he's like, oh, I forgot my phone. He goes back to grab his phone, and already when he's grabbing his phone, like literally on the block still, he turns around and goes back to his phone. Then the house is already catching fire. Um, so I think the immediateness of it, I guess, is what is striking in terms of like no matter what, like these people didn't really have a moment to prepare. They didn't have a moment to grab a family album, photo album from like the 1950s or their college diplomas or um anything that could have been passed down essentially. And I think that's for me at least, I think that's what is a bit more devastating. Like, people lost their homes. Yes, that is super important. You can rebuild a house. You can't retake photos.
yeah.
You can't recreate those memories. You can't go back 60, 70, 80 years and replace these things. So I don't know. That's what I think is really striking to me. Personally, I know that if something like that happened, I would at least just want to have pictures. Everything else I can replace, but I cannot replace photos and all that. So that's just a personal angle.
Yeah. I I know that like when it comes to advice on putting together your evacuation list or whatever, it's like get your photos, get all of those personal items, but am I understanding correctly that like a lot of these homes weren't even in areas that are traditionally like fire evacuation areas?
Yeah. A lot of them, the fires never come down that low. Like, I think in my whole life, I've only seen the fire burn like maybe one or two houses. So even when I got evacuated, I took one pair of pants and a shirt, and I was like, okay, I'm coming back tomorrow. And then tomorrow came, and I see on the news like all of the houses are burned down. But I think that's also why a lot of people didn't evacuate when they first got the notice, because it's never been something we've had to take that seriously before. Um, but then when I learned that the fire was burning at 1500 degrees and that the winds were 100 miles per hour, but that information wasn't being given to us, it was just like evacuate. And, like nobody who's been through it 6, 7 times in their life and nothing's happened is going to take it seriously without like the full picture. And I think that was kind of something that they could have communicated a little better too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of like what I was saying when we opened up. Like, we, my family my mother is a former firefighter and she takes fire very seriously, which is why we've always had evacuation lists. All our stuff is always packed up, like all the important stuff. But we live a little bit more in the foothills and we've had multiple fires like burn above our home, but never in the neighborhood. So it's just so odd to always accept that there's a possibility that our house could burn. Like I've always accepted that. But I never in my life thought that everything else would be gone but my house.
Yeah, yeah.
I think, yeah, if you're not from Altadena or Pasadena, your context of the conversation may sound like, oh, well, they should, why didn't they evacuate? But we're talking like half of a city almost. Like, yeah, like literally, like if you're looking at Altadena and you're looking at how far up a street goes, right? Like, you're not thinking that like 13, 14, 15 blocks is gonna just burn up. So, where my great uncle lived, he lived like literally right his block, it was like two or three blocks when it like basically stopped, you know? But he's on the brink of Woodbury. So for the fire to come from the actual mountain down to Woodbury is if you live in Altadena or Pasadena, the concept of that should be like pretty frightening, right? Like that seems weird that essentially, I mean, Woodbury is like our border for
Yeah.
Altadena, Pasadena, right? So if you're telling me the fire came from the mountain down to Woodbury, and as Danny is saying, right, it's like more than half of the city is being burnt up. So it's not just the foothill, it's not just the people who live at the top of the hill right next to the mountain. I mean, we're talking about damn near the whole city.
And
And
also,
so go ahead,
you
sorry.
wouldn't expect it to go that far west if it's all the way in Eaton Canyon. Nobody's think because when I was looking at the fire map, my girlfriend was like, "You need to evacuate. There's a fire by you." And I was like, "It's like 5 miles away from me. Like, what are you talking about?" But like nobody's expecting it to not only come all the way down, but then also come all the way west. Like that's like unheard of, honestly.
Yeah, and for reference, there are 17,000 structures in Altadena, 9,000 or 10,000 of them burned.
Wow.
And 9,000 of those were homes.
Yeah. And another like 1,100 were damaged by the
Mm.
fire.
Yeah, anyone listening who's not familiar with the area, you should really I'd encourage them to look at a map. It's just so stark and shocking when you see it on a map, when you see the fire line versus the city the city boundaries.
Yeah, and when you drive around, it's even more frightening. Like, I've been up there quite a few times. I spend like probably 2 or 3 nights in Altadena a week with my family. Mostly do laundry, kick it in my backyard. But it's like every new street that you drive, every street that I take, it's like, oh, this whole block is gone. Oh, that whole
Mhm.
block is gone. It's just like so unfathomable to realize how much damage has actually been done. And these aren't just like streets, like these are, I know every home on every street.
Yeah.
We, I went to school in Temple City, which is 11 miles away from my house in Altadena. And my dad used to always ask us, do you want to take the pretty way or do you want to take the freeway? And the pretty way is Altadena Drive. That whole street, my street, is just gone.
Yeah.
And it's just so crazy because, like, I've been talking to people about it, and, like, that's the same thing that a lot of people would call it the pretty way. Like, it's just crazy that, I mean, when you're a kid, it seems so magical, and, like, the mountains are right there, and there's so many trees, but yeah, it's just, like, absolutely unthinkable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I went up there for the first time a few weeks ago and I couldn't orient myself. I got lost. I lived there my entire life and I could not figure out where I was. And it wasn't until I hit Lake Avenue that I was like, oh, okay, this is where I'm at. But that took me like 10 minutes to figure out how to get out of where I was at. And it like broke my heart because I didn't want to go up there in the first place, but I had to for work. And then I get up there and it was like beyond what I could even imagine. Like the pictures don't do it justice. And I really don't think anybody should go up there unless they absolutely have to, honestly.
I would even say what is also staggering and like really heart stopping is if you're like in the San Gabriel Valley, And like Alhambra, like I've been in Alhambra multiple times since the fires. And being in Alhambra, you could just look up and you see a patch of like nothingness. Like
Oh,
it's
wow.
blank. Yeah, like I don't know if anyone's been if you're in the San Gabriel Valley after these fires and you just look up at the mountain, you used to see like, a patch of green, like a town. And it's just like scorched earth, like visibly something is
Yeah.
not on the map. So I think that's just to like hone in on the magnitude of it.
Yeah. Well, this touches on something I want to get to, which is the sort of lasting, ongoing impacts. I mean, there is still a huge burn area with all of this toxic ash and this monumental cleanup and rebuilding effort that everyone has been talking about. But I'm curious how environmental justice ties into this. I know, like with exposure to certain health risks, certain people can be especially vulnerable, like if they're renters or if they're working class, or all these factors that impact someone's ability to remediate and recover. And I'm curious if any of you have information to share about how environmental injustices are showing up in the aftermath of this fire.
Oh, I have a lot to say about this. So, one thing that I think people don't realize is that environmental racism is not new to Altadena. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory dumped rocket fuel into the Arroyo Seco for over 50 years, poisoning black families living west of Lake, and they found contaminants in the water, carcinogenic contaminants in the Lincoln Water Company service system, and they were forced to notify the community. And white residents in La Cañada did get a settlement. They sued because 34 residents had Hodgkin's disease, and they were able to prove that. So they won that lawsuit, but there was no justice given for the people in Altadena. And what I think people fail to realize is that people think that class can subjugate racism. But even though Altadena is a black middle class neighborhood, it's still black. And that's where the damage gets done. So now that people are talking about environmental racism happening in Altadena with all of these contaminants. Like, they're not thinking about the people who still have their homes and still have to live there and be exposed. Um, so it's just like there's a lot to consider. Because like they've been talking about removing the debris and taking it to Lario Park. That's in the San Gabriel Valley, but even that is in a place where it's kind of like a wind tunnel, and if they relocate a lot of the debris over there, it's likely that it will go into the wider community. Also, they would have to drive the debris through multiple towns through Sierra Madre, Pasadena, where else? Arcadia, and a few other places where if it's not contained properly, it could go into other communities. So there's like a lot of debate about where is the best place to process the debris, and people are saying that it should be processed in Altadena because that's where most of the contamination is happening and it should stay contained. But I wish I had an answer for what they should do, but I don't. I think that it's going to take a lot of expertise to figure out like the least harmful route of exposure. But I just want to say Altadena is not new to environmental racism. It's just a matter of how this is handled, that it's going to either be a turning point or make the situation much worse. But honestly, I see it making the situation much worse.
Mm. Thank you for. I appreciate you adding that it's not just environmental injustice; it's explicitly racism, and even in a case where this is a middle class neighborhood, race is still playing a role in the history of injustice there. I'm curious to hear, more generally, in your research on lead or on any other sort of environmental justice cases, these debates about where the right place to process debris is, or the right place to dump some sort of toxic materials. How do those debates usually go? Who are the parties involved? Like what are the powers at play in those situations?
Well, I do want to say firstly that these decisions are always political. So, like, people who have the money to lobby against keeping this out of their neighborhoods are going to be the people who win. And right now, Altadena is in a position where it's very vulnerable. So it's not like we really have a lot of um, I mean, like, yes, the community is coming together and we do have a lot of power, but like Wesley was saying, like we are an unincorporated community, so it's likely that we could be overpowered by like LA County, like a bunch of other places. Um, but I mean, environmental justice was founded, I mean, it's been happening forever, but it was founded in the 1980s, and one of their landmark studies that was published by Robert Bullard was to point out the fact that toxic waste facilities are sited in communities of color, and it's not often that communities of color that people of color settle around these toxic waste facilities. Is that they are purposely put there. And like it's just interesting to think about with Altadena, like what's going to happen when like people are already living there and now it's become this place of like devastation and toxic ash. But yeah, like I was saying, it is likely that these decisions are going to be political as to where the debris is processed. Altadena is an unincorporated community, so we do have some say in what happens, but when this project is so big, it's not like Altadena can just handle it itself. And as people, we are empowered to make decisions about our community, but because the toxic ash is something that's mobile and fluid, it's likely that there are going to be a lot of other constituencies that have a say in where the debris gets processed because it has no boundaries. Um, it can migrate miles, even up to 30 miles away. So, yeah.
So I know you said you don't really have like a perfect answer here for what should happen. But is there like a provisional answer you can give for what you think a solution would be, or at least like what sort of factors should we be considering, assuming we want to deal with the ash and the remediation in like the most justice forward way that we can?
I think the most important factor to consider is containment of the toxic debris when it's being processed. I don't have an answer as to whether it should be contained in Altadena because we also have to consider the families who are still living there. Like, my house is still standing in the community. Everything 2 blocks east is gone. I would not be very happy if my aging parents had to live next to a toxic facility. Um, but yeah, I think containment, definitely community voices. Like I think that this isn't something where one person is going to have the answer. I think it's going to take a lot of people to come up with um a just way to process all of the debris. And that's why the work that Zaria is doing is so important.
What a perfect segue. Yeah, I'd love to talk about the community role in all of this. I think when you're just watching the news, especially if you're an outsider who hasn't lived in the area, it's really easy to see like, okay, the press conferences from the mayor and oh the National Guard is coming in or whatever, and like all these NGOs like Red Cross and stuff. But I would really like to get a community like on the ground perspective, both in terms of what the response looked like during the fires, what sort of projects have cropped up afterwards. And I guess, yeah, we'll start there. So, like, how has the community response looked from your perspective?
I think that the community received like overwhelming support at the beginning of the fire. Everybody was out helping people, looking for resources. It's now that we're like 45 days out, it's starting to dwindle down
Mm,
because we're not in the media as much. Um, so it's like it's like how it is for most things. Like when it first happens, everybody's really supportive and is active, and then when they realize people still need help, it's kind of fading away. So I think it's really important for the people who weren't impacted by the fires to really rally for those who were, because honestly, they don't have it in them right now. I see people every single day, either at work or outside of work, and a lot of them just want to give up already. So it's really important for us to be the strength that they need until they have that fight in them, like we do. Um, I'm pretty angry with a lot of these bigger organizations because they're not really helping people, but they're like raising all this money. But then there's still people being homeless as of like today. Someone I've been working with is homeless as of today because the places she's applying for grants aren't actually giving grants to people. They're just having them apply, but then nobody's actually receiving the money. Um, yeah, I would just say that I think that those of us in the community and from the community that still have our homes really need to fight like hell right now, um, and speak up because there's just so many like crazy things that these corporations are doing to people, and it's not getting out because nobody cares anymore, you know.
do you want to say more about that?
For example, the Pasadena Convention Center that was housing 300 people was set to close, and they gave people like 3 days notice that they had to leave. And then we find out that the reason they were kicking 300 people out was because they were hosting America's Got Talent and the NAACP awards, which I understand that they had a contract, but some things are bigger than you getting money, you know? So I just have an issue with, so I guess not Red Cross. I have an issue with the convention center for kicking out Red Cross,
Mm,
because you can't say that you're like a staple in the community and you're here for the community, but then when it's inconvenient for you, you're displacing people who have already lost everything. And it's just stuff like that. And they don't talk about those things. They just talk about all the help that they're doing, but not how they're also hurting the same people that they're supposed to be helping.
right, right. It's a lot of PR. It looks good when it's in the news, and then
Yeah.
then it's not in the news. So how does that differ from the sort of like community led responses that you've been seeing?
At the beginning, a lot of these organizations were not really representative of those in the community. And they weren't inviting the organizations that were representing the community to the meetings and like to the table to actually have input. But I have seen a shift in that, because the other organizations are now speaking up for themselves. So now everybody's trying to collaborate together because we all have similar goals and opinions. So we realized it was easier for us to all work together versus apart. Um, so I think once there was like reorganizing, it's been a lot more productive. I do think like we should be supporting these like smaller grassroots organizations way more than we are like Red Cross and all of those places because they're not really effective right now.
Mm. So, what sort of work is being done right now with these smaller organizations?
They've been doing, a lot of people have been helping find housing. They've been doing food drives, resource drives. I just went to one being held by the Pasadena Senior Center where they had Community Build come out and they gave out gift cards and hotel vouchers and essential items. But yeah, so I feel like they're putting in more work with like direct relief and not just like, oh, here's a toothbrush and have a good day, you know?
Mm-hmm. Danny or Wesley, either of you have like community organizing things that you've been seeing going on?
I've mostly just been trying to support Zaria's endeavors, if I'm being honest. Like, I think having a direct tie to knowing Zaria and what have you has been helpful. Um, I don't know. I think I'm just really reflective about kind of like that immediate aftermath and like trying to help, trying to do all the things, trying to get food, trying to get clothes and blankets and stuff. And I was just realizing that at some point, like we had kind of gone overboard, not like we as in everyone on this podcast, but like as a community, as a city, we had gone overboard on like the material items, I guess. Like people don't need any more, cans of beans or no one needs another toothbrush like Zaria said. Like people need a home.
Mm.
And I think that's kind of where I've been like, oh shit, like stop going to Costco and buying stuff in bulk. You know, like people need to rebuild. Like if you're
Yeah.
an architect, if you are a designer, if you're a contractor, a landscaper, whatever it is, etc. Like that's what people need. Like they need someone to like tell them like, here's how we can make this look. Here's how we can work with you. If you're in the legal field, right? Like things like that. That's what was needed. Like yes, people needed the immediate like shelter, food, water, whatever, but people also need a long-term lease or a long-term stay, and they also need someone to help them see their future in Altadena. So I don't know. That's kind of been the angle that I've kind of thought about in community organizing. I think like standing with Zaria and like serving people or trying to donate stuff or organizing things, like that's also important. Like it doesn't all have to be the big PR or, I think I had to and other people had to find a role in like doing the actual service work, like organizing the things or
Hmm.
helping put stuff together or purchasing items that, for example, like Zaria put on a community event with Dina Rebuild is her org, and I don't know, I was like running to the store buying like shoe racks, or buying like a clothes rack. It's like that's also important too. It's like so the things that are being donated can also be on display for the people who need it. So I don't know, those are just things I'm thinking of. But yeah.
Yeah. Dina Rebuild has been primarily focused on like collecting resources, but then also offering events that have nothing to do with the fact that your house burned down. Like moments of relief. Like nobody wants to constantly have to talk about the most traumatic thing that's happened to them. So we've been doing like art therapy events and for kids and adults. So we have one of those coming up on March 8th. But it's not just about getting people essential items. And I think that's what a lot of us didn't realize at the beginning. Like, yeah, I do want to have all my stuff back, but I also need mental health. Also need like literally anything you can imagine. Like imagine having nothing and then people are just throwing used goods at you. But yeah, so that's been my primary focus lately is just finding resources that are actually useful and not necessarily about rebuilding because we're so far off from rebuilding. Like it's a long way before that's even a possibility. But right now we just need people to like self-regulate and feel safe. And nobody's gonna feel safe without housing and or like being able to process their emotions. Um, so I think phase two is more about like making people feel normal again. And then once we get like to the legal stuff, when people actually start getting settlements and are able to rebuild, then we can start focusing on, hey, I know this contractor, gathering those kind of resources. But right now, it's really just about getting people to a safe space.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like part of this rebuilding is is just rebuilding or maintaining the sense of community. Like even before the houses are rebuilt, it's like keeping people together, keeping that sense of Altadena alive.
Yeah. I also want to just make sure like the things that we're doing for people impacted by the fire are in their own community. A lot of these events that have been going on, people have to go all the way from Pasadena to LA. And that's just not, that defeats the whole purpose of trying to keep the community together. Like you shouldn't have to leave where you know and where you're comfortable to go get help and go all the way in LA. And people from Pasadena hate going to LA. Like, so, like that's already like, dang, I got to go all the way over there.
Yeah.
They know how to drive. And then, yeah, so my goal is to start doing like these broader scale events, like resource fairs and stuff like that, but in our own city where you don't have to be bussed out to get the help that they need.
If I could hop in, I think something that people may have like forgot about is like folks like your car burned up like
Right.
like
No,
how you
exactly.
yeah, I don't know, that's where I was like, how are we doing all these events all over the place and
Yeah.
like people don't like, yes, there's public transit, but
We,
it's not going to be convenient for the hundreds of thousands of people who've been displaced, like
Hmm.
yeah. And we
yeah.
also forget that this was a pretty elderly community. They already barely wanted to go down the street, and now you think they're going to go 10, 15, 20 miles away, you know? Um, so that's like also been my big thing, especially at my job where I've just been advocating for the seniors because those are the people who were forgotten and are often forgotten. Um, so and not making everything digital and making sure that we are actually going door to door and getting them the information they need because a lot of them don't have access, not that they don't have access, but they don't know how to navigate websites and apps and stuff like that. And so if you want to help a community, you have to help everybody in that community in the ways that they need help.
That totally makes sense. It's really important to like actually figure out what the need is before you try to respond to it. I've heard stories that people are like, there was like a big truck of clothes from Portland that came in or something, and then like nobody knew what to do with it because like that was not the need right now. And I'm curious, like like how do you find out what that need is, and what does it take to actually make your organization responsive to community needs?
We have a on our website, we have a link where you can literally ask for everything that you need. So that's like when we work with those families, that's usually how we do it. We have them give us a list, and then we get as much as we can from that list. And then at the events, it's honestly really just trial and error. Like I'll put stuff out and I see what people are taking or seeing. I talk to people, I see what they're asking for, and then I try to have that for the next time they come. Um, there's not a perfect system for it because everybody's needs are different. So you really just have to talk to people and not just assume. Yeah, community outreach is really about going out and figuring out what they need. And sometimes that means you're going to have to sit and cry with somebody while they're telling you stuff. And other times they'll just send you a text with what you need. But you just have to meet people where they are.
Would you be open to sharing more about kind of the emotional impacts you've seen? I think that's something that often gets overlooked. Like when I was watching the news, I was just really struck by all these reporters that were like, "Hello, sir, is this your house burning down?" And it's like, yeah, like he needs someone to
Yeah.
talk to, right? He doesn't want to be on the news. Like,
That pissed me off so bad. That if when I looked, because I didn't even know Altadena was on fire like that until I turned on the news. And the first thing I saw was one of my best friend's houses burning down.
oh my
And the
God.
news reporter walked up to their neighbor and is like, "Is this your house burning?" And I was like, "Okay, that's crazy." Um, but a lot of people they call it fire brain.
Mm,
So, like, they're not all the way there. Like, they can't remember certain things. They're not, like, you can have a conversation with them, but it doesn't feel like they're totally present with you. Um, and then I also had a woman come in and she's like, "I'm 76. I don't think I have a year left. I don't want to rebuild. I'm going to die." And that was like heartbreaking because that's like where a lot of people are at. This was it was a lot of the homeowners were elders. So it's just like really heartbreaking to know that that's where people are like, oh, I can't do this because I'm too old. And she just broke down crying. And I think a lot of people are just like devastated because they spent so much time and love and energy in this community and now it's completely gone. Um, and people are predatory and already trying to buy their houses and get them to sign on these class action lawsuits and don't really have their best interest in it because they know that they're not thinking straight right now. And they're like taking advantage of the fact that people aren't like mentally where they need to be to make these kind of decisions. And which is why I think mental health is really important right now, because in the long run, if you don't make the right decisions now, it's going to impact you for the rest of your life. And even if you do pass away, it's going to impact your family too. Um, yeah, it's really hard to see like people feel so defeated, you know?
Yeah, that's really heartbreaking. I haven't heard of this term fire brain before, but it makes sense that it would just be it's such a big loss and like a loss that requires so much like renegotiation of your life and like how does that look when this was your plan for the rest of your life? Like
Yeah.
hearing about all these elders especially, that's really hard to hear.
I
Yeah.
would also, I don't know, I also was thinking about the way that it's like, okay, you bought this house in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. I mean, anything before the last like 20 years where the, real estate market, actually, that's a lie. Anything before the last, let's say 14, 15 years. Like the last 10 years, the real estate market has doubled these prices, quadrupled them, whatever. But I mean, like I don't know, I just thought about that a lot. Like you went through a lot of trials and tribulations socially already as someone who's African American, if you're especially if you're like in your 70s or your 80s, right? Like you're born into a legally segregated system. You're dealing with legal racial discrimination, etc. You bust your ass and then you get the opportunity to buy a home because you saved the money, etc. And it's gone. Like everything you had possibly worked for, everything that we frame as like the American dream, as building wealth, as having intergenerational wealth, passing it down to, children, nieces, nephews, aunties, cousins, whatever, it's gone. Like it's pooped. And so I think that is what I was really trying to sit with is like the loss of I don't want to say the material because I feel like a home is beside like to me a home it shouldn't be considered a material item, right? Like people need homes. People have homes, period, right? But the loss of like this symbolic endeavor and yeah, I can't really wrap my head around it. It's just like poof, like literally poof, like it's gone. So what do you do now?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know. I think that's like a really big question. I think Zari's touching on it very well. Is like, what do I have left in me? And even then, on a whole nother note, while I'm like going down this rabbit hole, I'm like, okay, so then how does it look in like an estate plan or a will to leave a piece of land to someone that has been scorched? Like what does that even look like? If that person dies, what's the insurance going to do? Like, I don't know. There's just questions I don't have answers to, but I think I'm more or less like kind of wrapping my head around like if you don't want to rebuild, if you don't feel capable of doing so, then now what are the steps for you to even at least leave this legacy to someone else so that they could maybe have the opportunity to carry that on for you. So there's a lot of like layers. I don't know, it's scary. And I think another thing that I've been thinking about is like we already have kind of seen like Black Pasadena like poof and absolve.
Hmm.
And so Altadena was maybe the last resemblance of like a childhood or like earlier days or centuries, not centuries, earlier decades within the region. So I'm like, so now what? Like, are we all supposed to live in like the Inland Empire or Riverside or the high desert, or out of state or the Central Valley, and then we don't get to have home here anymore. So I don't know. That's kind of been a question with like the idea of like gentrification or people are going to be buying up these homes and building who knows what on them, and kind of like acting as if this never happened. That's like a really big concern.
I do want to say something to that point. Like, so I grew up in Altadena, and I used to play with a lot of kids on my block in the street, and we were all super tight. but they all got pushed out to the desert, to Montana, Palmdale, Lancaster, all over the place, where a lot of Black people have relocated. But these fires are bringing me closer to people that I've lived blocks away from my entire life. And that's really beautiful. Because like a lot of people got pushed out, but the people who remain are coming together. And like Zaria has introduced me to multiple people I didn't know my whole life, but we've lived like so close.
Yeah. Honestly, the only way to keep the community together, unfortunately, is going to be to pursue legal action because that's the only way we're going to be able to rebuild. Everybody's underinsured right now. So you're either going to take the insurance check and move to Hesperia, or you're going to have to sue and rebuild with the money that you get from the lawsuit,
Mm.
which sucks because everybody hates lawyers. I myself hate lawyers. I know I work at the law firm, but I get where everybody's coming from, but that is the only way that we're going to keep the community together and get what we need, the money that we need, because this is going to cost billions and billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about the future of Altadena and what, I don't know, sort of goals and priorities should be, because yeah, there is already, in the last like 14 or so years, like Wesley was pointing out, this sort of like gentrification process that's been happening both in home ownership and tenancy in the area. How do we stop this from being like an accelerating factor in that? And
So
yeah.
one thing I'll say, I used to work at a nonprofit. Do I want to shout them out?
Nah, we
Fine.
don't we don't
No,
shout
no,
people out
okay,
with
we're not doing
that.
it. We're not doing it. Okay, yeah, because no, I had to quit. But I learned a lot there. And so one of the biggest hurdles for like black families and keeping property is that they don't make estate plans.
Hmm.
And so in the state of California, if you don't have an estate plan slash a will, whatever, then like things go to probate, people have to sue over it, and then people end up, selling the property of the home and then splitting it. But that leaves everyone with nothing, right? So something that is super important to recognize is one, like a will and an estate plan are two different things. Everyone, if you own property, if you have all these accounts, whatever, you need to visit an estate planner. There's an association of Black estate planners and like trust professionals. And I think they're based in Washington, D.C., but you can still meet with them remotely. But my thing is like you need to be able to set aside time for your legacy, like period. And so I think that's like one of the things that needs to happen, is like if you're a part of this or not, if you're a Black person who owns land, specifically in the state of California and the city of Los Angeles, you need to make sure you have an estate plan and make sure you know who you want to have your property, who you want to be over this and that, because the estate will keep your property in a trust. And I may not be getting everything on the dot, but the long story short is that like just having a will is not good enough. Like not just having a notarized piece of paper is not good enough. You need to have an estate plan and a trust. And that's gonna keep your property safe. This is how people who are wealthy have been wealthy for decades, if not centuries. It's because they have estate plans and wills and trust. Okay. So anyway, that's a big part of it. Like this whole idea that people are like, oh, I don't want to talk about me dying or this, that, and the other. Like, talk about it, right?
Hmm.
Like, it doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow or next week or in a year or two. But in the long term, what is your legacy? What is your plan? And how do you want that to be dished out amongst families so that they're not left with nothing? That's like super important. I think that's one way to like definitely prevent and slow gentrification. Like, do not put your property in a vulnerable position or just sell it. Make sure it is locked up in an estate and a trust. That is my advice. Also, have a beneficiary. That's it.
I agree with the beneficiary. It streamlines the process. You just walk in, you say, "Hey, I'm the beneficiary." They give you what you need. If you don't have that, it's a whole process that gets delayed. It could take up to like 90 days sometimes. Also, it kind of gets rid of the arguing over who gets what because you already said who gets it.
If I may intersecting it, I'm sorry. So the organization is called Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals.
Hmm.
If anyone's interested, Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals.
I want to kind of zoom out and talk about your dreams for the future of Altadena. I know that might be
kind of a hard thing to imagine right now, but like in the best case where the community keeps fighting and keeps coming together, what do you hope to see happen for Altadena or for LA as a whole? Because these fires are going to keep happening with the climate crisis accelerating, and how do we build, I don't know. There's so many stupid platitudes I could say about like building resilience or whatever, but like when you think about like what you wish happened or what you're hoping is going to happen in the future, like what does that look like?
Okay, well, something that I didn't touch on that I would like to touch on is that private entities need to stay out of Altadena. Like Rick Caruso and Steadfast LA, they are already getting so many donations to build prefabricated homes in Altadena. And I think that people need to donate money directly to families that are seeking to rebuild rather than donating to these billionaires who are promising to rebuild Altadena. And I swear to God, if they build an Air One in Altadena once this is over, oh, me and my friends were all pulling up because that's crazy. But as far as like my dreams for Altadena, I hope to see a whole community. I hope to see my neighbors again. Um, I hope that it is still single family homes. So my degree is in environment and sustainability, and we talk a lot about dense housing as being like a solution for climate change. Um, but Altadena is not really a place where there should be a bunch of apartment buildings. Like, I think it would be important to rehouse people. But I hope that the spirit of Altadena stays alive in the infrastructure.
Something I've been kind of thinking of is like a return, maybe. I don't know. Like as someone who like left for college and like Altadena kind of was left in like a distant memory because my grandmother's home, well my grandparents' home, but my grandfather passed away like in 1990s, so whatever. But like that house being like sold and like then me leaving to go to college all kind of happening at once. Like I think for me a future of Altadena would be like a return or like returning back to roots, returning back to this neighborhood that my parents and like I grew up in. Um but also, yeah, kind of like it as a family, like as a family place, as a community, right? Like, I don't want to return to an Altadena that doesn't look like Altadena. I think
Mm.
when you move out of the town, you go somewhere like San Francisco, or you visit a place like New York, or you've lived in LA for a while, you realize that Altadena has like the small town charm to it. That's in some ways kind of, I guess, romantic. It sounds weird, and it's almost like an oasis. Like it's very close to like LA, like miles wise, and you could just hop on the two or the 110 and get to downtown. But at the same time, it feels like you're in a whole nother place, right? Like you're in the foothills. You could go on a hike. You could see bears and raccoons and possums and coyotes like just running around in the middle of the night. And there's not sidewalks, and there's these big great trees that have, well, they're not there anymore, but these trees that have just been there for centuries or decades that just tower over homes, like, and I don't know, there's just something about that I would love to see replenished, and not in some weird fast build artificial way, and not having people who aren't even from Altadena try to come in and tell people who are from there what they need to do or how they should rebuild, right? So yeah, that's what I dream of.
I want Altadena to stay black.
Mm.
Nobody else said it, but I don't want to see a whole bunch of non-blacks there. I really don't. And I love diversity. I'm all for diversity. But that was like a safe haven. I knew I was going to go to work and I was going to see a bunch of old black people that went off on me, and that felt like home. But I also don't want to see multifamily units. I don't want to see apartments. I don't want Altadena to turn into Pasadena, because Pasadena is starting to turn into LA. And I don't want that to happen in Altadena. But heavy on the stay black. Don't
Mm.
edit that out.
I would love to just keep expanding the vision out here. I want to end on this last question of what utopia looks like to you, but before we get there, it's been such a hard couple of months and weeks, but is there anything in this process that's been especially inspiring or beautiful to you that you've seen? I know Dani touched on that a little bit with, meeting people that you haven't really met before, but if you want to get more into, like, I don't know, the little moments within this that are giving you hope right now.
I would say seeing people that you grew up with, like I went to donate some food and then like someone's like, "Hey, Wesley, is that you?" I was like, "Oh my God, like I haven't seen you since high school." Like, or even us connecting, Luca, like it's again, like I think there are ways that of course this is devastating, but there's also ways that this has like made people check in with one another. Like
Mm.
I've heard of multiple people who like they haven't talked since high school or maybe they had a falling out or what have you. And because of this, they've been like, "Hey, how's your family? Are you doing okay? Like, how are you?" Like, I think it in some ways has reunited a lot of relationships that may not have had the opportunity. And again, I'm not saying it takes a catastrophe to make people reconnect. That's not what I'm saying, but just in a simple way of like, again, community like naturally forming, whether that's new community or, your roots of community, that definitely has been a part of the process. I would also maybe touch on like being able to support your local businesses that you may not think are doing well, but they maybe are. So, um, quick example, like I went to my barber shop. I hadn't been in a while because everything was happening. It was really busy. I was like, "Oh, how are you? Like, is business slowing down for you? Like, has it been hard?" And he's like, "No, actually, like my business is doing well." And not that it's a good thing, but he said, because of what's happened in Altadena, like he has more customers now. So there's just ways that I feel like you could, I don't know, I'm rambling a little bit, but like do your part or being from Altadena or Pasadena, be like, "Oh, I want to go have a meal over here or go to the sandwich shop Connell's or, just like kind of be in the space again in like a really, for me at least, a nostalgic way, right, of growing up there.
How's Connell's doing? Are they there?
They are present. They are present.
Yeah, I just
Okay.
had them not too long ago. Seeing everybody come together, like regardless of if you liked them or if you've had beef or anything like that before, everybody just came and was really supportive of everyone in the community. I think that was really inspiring for me. Um, and a lot of like personal growth has happened for me because of the fire. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And then once I started getting into like community work, then I realized that that was where my passion was. So that's been like a nice moment. Like, even though it came from something so tragic, I was able to figure out what I wanted to do and be able to actually help people now.
Something really beautiful that I saw was probably like a week after the fire or when the National Guard lifted the orders. I was at my house and I was sitting in the backyard and I saw probably 100 birds, like a huge flock of birds, like fly over my house, and they were returning to the area. And it just reminded me that, you know what, like no matter what happens, the earth might shake us off like bugs, but it's gonna keep spinning. Like it's just a matter of time before Altadena heals.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing. We've touched on some little moments of hope and beauty and people coming together. So, expanding that way out to just sort of this ideal vision, I'm curious what utopia looks like for you.
Well, I don't know. I'm just like, damn, utopia. Like, I mean, I think right now what we're dealing with, like, we're dealing with a country that's dystopian in general. And, I mean, I can't just think, I like want to think of it in just the like aspect of like just Altadena, but overall, I feel like there's a lot of dystopian energy. And so I don't know. I mean, I'm really like, what would utopia look like? Like, but then again, I'm like, I don't want to romanticize like being younger and like having the privilege of growing up in Altadena or whatever. But I don't know. I think Utopia would look like Altadena beforehand, right?
Mm.
And I think to Danny's point, for me at least, with the knowledge I have, it'd be what Altadena looked like beforehand, um, taking away, toxic waste in the water or carcinogens in the water, right? And continually replenishing, I guess, the legacy of Black home ownership and Black families in Altadena, honestly. Uh, I think it's funny thinking about Danny mentioning like, the beautiful way down Altadena Drive. And I feel like every time I think about kind of like that area, I'm continually reminded of the multiple times I was learning to drive and I would drive down Altadena Drive on the way to Pasadena High School, or the times, we just go over there and park and go on a little hike and walk down to Eden Canyon and get in the river or go to the waterfall, right? So I think that to me, having not taken, for granted like what Altadena was, I would return back to the special place that it held, right, in my heart, and also double down on like continuing that legacy for the families that are from there.
Um, I don't believe in utopia, so that's why I wasn't the right person to answer this question.
I'd love to hear more about that too, and why you don't hold that belief.
I'm just a realist. That's all. But I do agree with, like, I want the same things Wesley wants, but I'm also like, I don't think we're gonna get to that point. So I don't like to get my hopes up. But I do think it'll be like, I think it'll be a blend of what Altadena once was and then whatever new things that are gonna come in, which isn't a bad thing. It's just not what I would want necessarily.
Well, what would you want?
I would want Altadena to be like it was when I was a kid, like safe, fun, family oriented. Yeah.
Yeah, something I've been thinking about a lot is like, so the area that I live in or that my family lives in, um, west of Lincoln, Avenue is like mostly okay and not burned. And like that's going to be the old Altadena, like the historic Altadena from now on. And I hope that people hold on to those houses, and I hope that the rest of Altadena doesn't look like cookie cutter McMansion type homes. Like that would break my heart. Or apartment buildings. Because that's the other thing I've been thinking about is like Altadena is not, I mean, I think there's like 42,000 residents, but it doesn't feel that crowded
Mm.
at all. Like there's no traffic. It's just like a chill little town, and it would be devastating if like it got really like crowded and busy. And like I think also we have to like it's like very difficult because like in environmental justice and like in housing rights and a bunch of other stuff, there's something called NIMBYism, called not in my backyard. And like people have these utopia futures where they want like dense housing, walkable cities, all this kind of stuff that's like idealized. But where do we want that? Do we want that in our backyard? Like, what do we really want? Like, personally, I want what Altadena used to be like when I was a kid.
Mm.
So,
Can I touch on that? Me and my dad were just talking about this because Um, oh, we were talking about the fact that his mortgage is less than what I pay for rent. And I was all like, that is so distorted that like I don't own anything, but like I'm paying more than you and you own something and like you have the amenities. Like I don't have the amenities. I don't have a driveway. I don't have, well, a driveway, but you know what I'm saying? Like a yard, a backyard, a garage. Like those aren't things that we have. And so I don't know. I feel like in a weird way, the NIMBYism thing, it's conflicting because it's like, well, I never said as a younger person that I also want to like, you know, not live in like an Altadena. No one said that I wanted to like live in, an apartment for my whole life, and always be on a train. Like that's not everyone's dream. So I think that it's weird because our American dream, at least locally, what we've been told and taught and what we've seen is like, I can live in an Altadena. I can have a yard and a community that isn't a city or isn't like dense housing. And I don't think it has to be anything like crazy or weird. It doesn't, I don't even feel like it always has to be NIMBY. It's just like, why are we told that this is like what we can aspire to, and then it's not existing or it's absolved? I feel like that's like a little bit of a struggle. Um, so I agree with Danny in the term of like, I liked what I grew up in. I loved that. I enjoyed it. You know, that had a legacy to it. And just because it may have been burnt down because of catastrophe, that doesn't mean when it makes a comeback, it needs to look like a mini downtown LA or something, you know?
Yeah, I hope they keep the bungalow style and the Spanish style houses and not just like these super ugly cardboard box style. You know what I'm saying? I hate that new build that was on Lake was so out of place. And I'm not saying I was happy it burned, but I am saying that it didn't belong up there, you know? And I hope that that stops it from popping up all over the place.
I guess I know we're up against time, but that was the last thing I kind of want to add is like, people as a like I majored in design, and so that was an undergrad, but the thing is that people have continually talked about the loss of like feeling in architecture and style and like everything being so sterile. And I think Altadena offered like kind of a safe haven from the sterility of like modern buildings. So I think I agree with Zari in that way, is like these homes, I hope whatever is rebuilt in Altadena, it resembles Altadena. And again, it doesn't look like, not, it's not to be shady, but I hope it doesn't look like, you know, row houses in Palmdale and Lancaster, you know? Like, I hope it still has personality and charm. And it is, and it, or it isn't just a bunch of like wide paneled glass houses with like white squares and, you know, stainless steel garages and I digress. Y'all get my vision. Like, I hope it still has the charm it once had. So yeah.
Solarpunk Now is written, hosted, and produced by me, Luca Dowell. The Solarpunk theme song is by Red Keener. My guests today were Dr. Wesley Cox, soon to be Dr. Dani Haogue, and Zaria Smith. You can find Zaria's organization, Dina Rebuild, at dinarebuild.com. Please consider a donation to help Altadena rebuild not just their structures, but their community. You can follow me on Twitter at SolarpunkCast, Mastodon at SolarpunkCast@spore.social, or visit solarpunkcast.net for show notes and to support the show with a donation. And remember, the realization of any vision requires action. I strongly encourage you to get involved with local organizations whose goals align with the brighter future you want to see. Analysis is important, but we have to back it up with collective practice. Keep dreaming big, and keep up the good work.